I think that Michigan is at a really good point from a program perspective. Honestly, I'm worried about them coming into Happy Valley this fall, and I'm worried about our undersized defensive line being able to stand up against what they've, you know, eventually became the number one running attack in college football. I mean, that can be disputed, but when you have two of the top five backs in the league going for your team, it's hard to stop you if you have a competent offensive line. I'm wondering, Mark, how do you view Penn State's offensive line and Penn State's running backs? And I watched your top 10 running backs in the Big Ten video, so I know where you rank them. But potential wise, how do you view Penn State's offensive line and running back duo versus Michigan's?
And I think it's a great question because if you pulled a number of college football fans, knowledgeable fans across the nation, they default to Michigan, just automatically think Michigan's got the best running back room. But we saw as true freshmen, we have to understand the experience gap, of course, between Edwards, who had valuable playing time the season before, but of course, Blake Corum versus these two guys, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, thrown into the fire as true freshmen, and look at how they responded. So they could have a tremendous level of growth. And Corum and Edwards, as you well know, were running behind arguably the best offensive line in the country. Allen and Singleton had to make a lot of things work by themselves. So the performances they turned in last year are pretty remarkable when you take all that into consideration. Now, in terms of Penn State's offensive line, I'm being told, based on the Penn State guys that I talk to and based on what I'm reading, and we want to thank our guy Phil Steele. I'm just starting to go through 350 pages here, and we'll have him on hopefully here soon. Is that the Penn State offensive line is supposed to be the best of the James Franklin era. It's supposed to be.
Well, for the first time in James Franklin era, we have a bona fide top 10 pick in Olu Fashanu. I think if you look at the tape from the Ohio State games and then at the end of the year, the Utah games, and you look at the offensive line, it looks like a unit that could potentially dominate, which in James Franklin's term as head coach, we haven't had anything close to dominating the offensive line.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. You've not had, that's been the sore spot on the entire team ever since probation, has been the offensive line. It's never, and obviously that's ancient history now. There's an excuse for 3 or 4 years at a position that obviously needs depth. The two line positions on both sides of the ball, but that excuse has long been they just haven't recruited and developed to the level that they need to take on those two teams.
And so, do you look at it this year where they have I understand that they haven't been the best when it comes to recruiting big defensive linemen. They've got the outsides, with Micah and now Adiza Isaac. I think they have the outsides recruiting well. And they have beefed up. If you look at the internal weight records from Penn State going into this year, they've beefed up their defensive line by an average of about, I'm just ballparking here, by about 25 pounds. I'm just curious, what do you think they do in the run game against a team like Ohio State or Michigan?
What Penn State should do in the run game?
Yeah, and I'm talking both offensively and defensively, because I think defensively has been their big hole. They just don't have the big bodies down in front that can stand up against some of these power run games.
Well, Penn State's at a place where they can almost scheme and funnel their attention like Ohio State and Michigan can just on a couple games. Not to overlook Maryland and some other possibilities out there. Iowa comes to town. but you know, they should be studying uh, Ohio State and Michigan's defensive fronts and what they have struggled against and implement those concepts into their running game. Because their offensive line still probably, especially against Michigan, isn't probably ready just to take them on with a vanilla type ground attack. I,
Which gives us a lot of hope because we actually get Michigan at Beaver Stadium this year.
yes.
Whereas we go out to Columbus to face the Buckeyes. I feel like even if we lose that game against Ohio State, we have a pretty good chance of making the playoffs if we are able to overcome Michigan when they visit Happy Valley.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, Nathan, in looking at it, I am having a tough time separating the three teams and trying to figure out what's going to happen because there's a large consensus out there that thinks that they're going to do exactly what you're talking about and they're going to round robin beat each other and all finish 11-1. I'm still not completely sold on Penn State. See, here's another factor in Penn State, and I hate that you've lost a couple of your best players on defense because I know Iowa's been a better defense and Illinois was really good on defense, but athletically, I think that over the last couple of years, especially last season, this was the best defense in the Big Ten. I just think they were loaded and just had a great defense, and probably what kept them from being at that level all the time is exactly what you're talking about. The defensive front, not as stout as it needed to be to let the linebackers do their thing and for the secondary to look as good as it really was.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I believe that we didn't have a single our defensive lineman above 300 pounds last year.
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
And when you're facing teams that are built in the trenches and they're focusing on the run game with two of the top five backs in the entire country, you're going to have a lot of trouble with that. And I think that's, the way that we can kind of bridge the gap between us and Ohio State and Michigan is through that defensive line. And our edge rushers have been elite for the past 5 years. But if you just base it on defensive linemen, we've had a lot of struggles. And there has been a real focus from the strength team and from the defensive coordinator to beef up these defensive linemen. I, I don't know if you know anything about them, but I'm curious in the potential you see. Penn State's been rated very highly when it comes to incoming defenses for this 2024 season. I'm curious, I think all of that comes to a point if Penn State has a defensive line that can stop the run. And I'm wondering if you think that's a possibility. Like I've seen them as high as number 2 in the nation from defenses this upcoming year. I'm wondering if you think that's a possibility or if it strictly depends on the run stopping ability.
Well, again, I'll go back to saying that athletically, I think this defense is as good as any defense in the country, but the most important position on the defense is the defensive line. The movement of the line of scrimmage is still the most important factor in football, and they're good there, but they're not elite. And if you look at I would think that this that this coaching staff, especially the defensive staff, is Manny Diaz and company are watching that Michigan tape over and over and over and over and over, and because that is one of the worst beat downs I've ever seen. Just strictly rushing attack versus rush defense between top 10 teams. That looked like Michigan's playing Rutgers. And I wouldn't even say that because Rutgers had a pretty darn good defense. That was like, that's like, Michigan playing a MAC school running the football.
Which gives
And
you deep concerns, right?
yeah, so Penn State's got to determine, did we get whipped that badly on scheme? And I doubt it.
Hmm.
So to your point about getting into the strength and conditioning program, that's what is going to be most, and hopefully that's already been done because, you know, in about a month, they're hitting the field and they better be ready to roll because there's not a whole lot of meaningful weightlifting after that. It's meaningful, it's maintenance, but you make your moves physically in the off season.
Right. Well, Mark, do you remember 2016 when Michigan basically just pushed
Yes.
Penn State over?
49-10. Yes.
It was, I've never felt that way. I mean, I'm only 27, but I've never felt that way as a Penn State fan. That, uh, basically, I didn't feel like we even had a chance from the get go because they just dominated both lines of scrimmage. I think we've come a long way from that. But if you look at the Michigan tape from last year, it looks awful similar to that 2016 game.
Hmm.
And I'm just wondering, and the score is not as bad, but it's almost the same. I'm just wondering, what does it take for Penn State to take that next step?
Well, a lot of people think that Penn State has taken aim at Ohio State because obviously, since James Franklin has been there, Ohio State's been the team. And this Michigan emergence is just in the last two seasons, and Ohio State hasn't really fallen off. Just Michigan has joined them. So Ohio State's been the obvious team to take down. And so James Franklin and his staff's focus has been, how do we beat Ohio State? Well, that's a much different scheme and approach than it is how do you beat Michigan, just because of the offensive weapons and throwing the ball downfield and all of that. So they have equipped themselves to try to beat Ohio State. And obviously, you're bringing up 2016. They did it that year with a special teams play in the last 5 minutes of the game, but more so they've been able to compete with Ohio State, and you've had your heart pulled out of your chest three or four times, 27-26, 39-38. But Penn State at least showed in those games that they could compete with Ohio State because they had similar style athletes. But against Michigan, now let's not blow one game out of proportion too much. Yeah, they got beat to hell against Michigan last year,
Right.
but they have competed in that game and won the majority of the games at home against Michigan. So this has only happened once where they looked that well. Again, 2016 was quite a long time ago, but in recent years, it's been a close series.
Hmm. And if you remember 2017, that was the year. 2018 is the year I graduated from Penn State. They dominated Michigan on the different lines,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be offensive or defensive. They dominated, and Saquon ran like he's never run before. I mean, wide open gaps for him. Um, I just I question whether it's scheming or whether it's talent on the lines. Why we can't get back to that type of level, and I got to be honest, Mark. I'm confident in the air attack this year, despite us not having very many proven wide receivers. I'm confident in the air attack because I believe that much in Drew Aller, and I believe that if you have a hard play action in the Big Ten, you're going to be a really good team, and they have Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. But it really worries me. The one game I'm going to go to this year is Penn State hosting Michigan. And it really worries me whether it be the coaching that team has or whether it just be the interior line players they have that we can overcome that.
Well, your worry is justified to this point until proven otherwise. But your hope is that Michigan figured out Ohio State when we were having this kind of conversation about Ohio State and Michigan at this point 2 years ago. It looked like there was a a Grand Canyon's gap between those two programs, and Michigan made it up quickly. Well, Penn State's recruiting at a level like it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to see them win the conference, obviously, this year and win those two games. Whereas the Michigan gap against Ohio State looked like it was, years away, and they turned it over overnight. Now Penn State looks close, so don't lose heart. It's possible. It's more than possible.
How do you view the development between the three teams, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan? From a developmental standpoint, and you know the recruiting ratings better than anyone. So, on a developmental standpoint, based on the talent that they're getting to campus, who do you view as 1, 2, and 3 in that ranking?
Oh, I think it's pretty clear. Michigan 1, Ohio State 2, Penn State 3. Michigan is generally
The best.
developing players at every position. Really, they've been really good at every position the last 2 years. Their wide receivers aren't the best, but they've developed all those positions. We'll see if they continue to develop the quarterback to be an elite quarterback. He's not that right now. Ohio State, their secondary, I don't know what's happened to Ohio State's secondary. They've had, ever since Urban Meyer stepped on campus, and even before that, arguably the best secondary in the nation year to year, or been one of the 3 or 4 best. And their secondary's been awful for 3 years now. And then they've changed their coaching staff. They brought in Tim Walton and Perry Eliano to fix that. They did not last year. And Ohio State is underachieved along the defensive front. They have a good defensive front, but they should have a great defensive front. They have 5 stars tripping over each other.
Right.
So Ohio State's been a little bit more hit or miss. And then, of course, I'd only put Penn State at number 3 because they've recruited as well as Michigan, not Ohio State, but is recruited as well as Michigan over the last 5 or 6 years. And obviously they haven't brought it up to a championship level team as of yet.
The difference between the three programs right now is that you don't have, back in 2016, we had one player who kind of set himself apart. And you know who I'm talking about in that.
Sure.
When you look at the programs in Michigan with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and when you look at Ohio State with Marvin Harrison Jr., I don't think that Penn State necessarily has a player that is going to stick out to you like those three do right now. And I'm not saying that can't be overcome in the next year with Drew Aller, with Nick Singleton, and obviously, Katron Allen. But at the same time, it's hard to put yourself in that specter without actually having a player who's been that legitimate.
No, that's a fair point. It's a good point. And I believe Penn State has had that level of player, but they've been on defense, and defensive players generally don't have as much of an impact on the game as opposed to just saying, Blake Corum, here's the ball, go. Saquon, here's the ball, go. And obviously quarterback, that's where Ohio State has been better than everybody else too.